Welcome everyone to another webinar on the hosted by the Global Research Alliance for AI in Learning and Education. I'm going to start by just a few quick slides to give you a sense of what exactly it is that we are all about and what we'll be addressing today. This is an organization that was formed, I guess, about a year and some ago, and the interest was to basically help translate research into practice as it relates to AI in education. It's a very established field of literature and research, in some cases with AI Ed and others going back dozens of years, and even the newcomers to the space, if you will. EDM has probably got to be hitting 15 years if they haven't already. Learning Analytics, the Solar Group, Black, they're, I think, coming up to 13, 14. So it's about integrating existing research and translating that into practice, particular emphasis on leadership. So ensuring that we're providing support for leadership as they plan and deploy AI, and as well the capacity issues that relate to AI literacy, both with practitioners, teachers, and of course leadership. The way we're structured, and there's more information on the website, but we're three primary areas. One is charter members. These are universities and several corporations that we're discussing with now that advance sort of annual fees to be involved in this group and to support the work that we're doing. Currently, we have University of Queensland, Monash, University of South Australia, University of Texas Arlington, Arizona State University, National University of San Francisco, and others in discussion that are charter members. And then we have our scientific committee, which is comprised of really people with industry on the ground doing the things that y'all are doing. And this is related to, at this point at least, AI labs and learning are coming up right and left, but we have every major AI and learning lab globally represented on the advisory committee. So we have a strong sort of scientific orientation. Increasingly developing research partnerships. We have a number of projects such as Senior Leadership Innovation Perspective, Sense AI, and other projects that are specific research initiatives to try and understand how AI is practically being deployed in the education sector. And so we're looking at partners that just want to run studies or work with us in some of those projects. We have already advanced some grant initiatives related to NSF and soon to be Australian grant programs as well to fund and support this work. Today's webinar is pretty straightforward: infrastructure for AI in education. It is, as I'm sure you're all aware of, the most exciting topic that you could possibly be talking about on a Friday morning if you're in Australia. Actually, I think, Ryan, you're probably Friday morning as well. And then some of us are still stuck in the Thursday time zone. But we're going to be looking at infrastructure for AI in education. We have an outstanding group of members on our panel that represent Australia USA connection, and that's essentially an overview of what we'll be doing. Is what you see on your screen. We'll spend a little bit of time on panel introductions. Then we're going to do 4 rounds of questions. At any point you can ask questions and I'll tag them as they come along and as there's a pause. This is not a presentation heavy session. This is more discussion oriented. And we will run through a couple of different questions that look at what's missing in the AI learning analytics EDM landscape. What should an AI infrastructure look like in education settings? What might that look like? What kind of stakeholders are involved and how do you address the needs of those stakeholders? We're looking at IT in particular, but faculty, leaders, and others are impacted too. And then finally, of course, depending on time, we'll spend a bit of a focus on the power dynamics. Right? What does it mean when we're partnering with big tech in education settings? Who owns what, and what's the effects and the outcome of that? So that's roughly the intention of our panel today. I'm going to start by, let's say, I'm going to ask Ryan Baker, a longtime friend and colleague, to provide an introduction to himself and his work and where that's situated within the sort of AI infrastructure language before we dive into a deeper chat about this. Ryan.
Oh, thank you for the introduction. Hi, I'm Ryan Baker. I'm faculty at the University of Pennsylvania, where I direct the Penn Center for Learning Analytics. And I've been involved in learning analytics since before it was called learning analytics. So for a while, which is just a way of saying I'm old. But I have strong interest in AI and Ed and EDM and learning analytics infrastructure. I've been involved in several such projects, including the Pittsburgh Science and Learning Center Data Shop, which I'm no longer directly involved with, the Morph infrastructure at the University of Pennsylvania, which provides researchers access to work with our data sets, various apps for research, including Quick Red Fox and HART. And it's just a great honor to be here. And I apologize for the darkness of my environment. Although I've been able to be involved in many infrastructures for AI and education, one infrastructure I haven't figured out is the light switch in my hotel room. So thank you all for joining.
Great, thanks, Ryan. And we'll get into a little more detail about how we end up addressing questions related to some of the projects you've been involved with, and you've already touched on a few. You've been involved in several large-scale data environments. You've got several that you've now deployed more locally, and that you've also partnered with, like Morph and others, where you've connected with other peer institutions. So we'll dive into that in a little bit more detail in just a minute. Let's go to Jazia. Hello and welcome.
Thank you, George. Hi, I'm Jazia Lajal. So for those who saw my name written, the D is silent. It's just Jazia. So I'm a lead data scientist at Practera. Practera is an education and technology company, and we specialize in experiential learning. So our main goal is to help learners develop their employability skills. And we do that through our own developed platform, and also by leveraging the latest technologies in LA, basically. And so you can imagine that AI infrastructure is very important for us. But I'm also lead in a CRC project called Trusted Analytics, which is a partnership between industry and researchers. In fact, one of our research partners is UniSA, and I've been working closely with StretchCo on this. So the project is about data privacy and security in educational data. And that also gives you an idea of why infrastructure is important for us, because we look at it as well from that point of view of data privacy and security too. And yeah, that's it. Thank you.
Great, thanks, Jazia. Hassan, over to you, welcome.
Thank you, George, and thanks for the invitation. Hello, everyone. My name is Hassan Khosravi. I'm an associate professor in data science at the University of Queensland in Australia. My research focus is mostly in the area of AI and education, and during the past few years, much of my research has been embedded into development of two educational systems, which in my opinion characterize the main two types of AI ed systems that we have. The need for these have come mostly from my teaching side. I teach large first-year engineering courses, just over 1,000 students, as well as graduate level courses in data science. So the two systems, the first is called Ripple. It enables academics and students to partner together to create pools that are used in order to recommend personalized content to students and based on their mastery level. And the second is an intelligent analytical dashboard called Course Insights that collects student data from various systems to provide actionable insights for instructors. I would say, just to talk a little about the infrastructure needs of these two, it's quite different. Any sort of standalone app like Ripple that doesn't utilize data from outside of the platform, it uses various AI components, but oftentimes the needs for such systems are well adapted to what cloud providers such as Amazon Web Services would provide. They have, in particular, needs for instant demand on use of their CPU and GPU as it spikes because of the use of some AI components there, which is well adopted again in such systems. Course Insights and various other analytical, predictive, or prescriptive models that collect data from various sources, they have quite a bit of a different need. They are collecting data from all these different tools, and they need to be able to communicate with them. Where we're lacking the APIs and sort of the pipelines in order to make that happen. This is where I think the AI in education infrastructure is much needed, and hopefully we'll talk a little about that today.
Great, thanks, Hassan. And I'll throw it over to Srećko Joksimović, and some of the motivation of this webinar came from a position paper that he's been working on called Data for Artificial Intelligence Research. Srećko.
Yeah, thank you, George, and hello, everyone. I'm a senior lecturer here at the Center for Changing Complexity, senior lecturer in data science, right? Here at Center for Changing Complexity and Learning at the University of South Australia. I joined this wonderful group like 5 years ago. I was just thinking about that a few moments ago. So my research centers around enabling productive human AI collaboration, right? And in that sense, I'm currently working on establishing if we are to have general AI able to collaborate with us in process of complex problem solving and decision making, what kind of roles, actions, and capabilities we need for such an AI partner, right, to coordinate teamwork and collaboration. So the key there is basically collaboration, as I think that most of the current application of AI in education sits somewhere in the area of narrow AI, and to really enable that the further development of general AI, we need slightly different or completely different infrastructure, right? So that's one aspect how I got involved in that discussion. And I used to be involved in the project called MOOCDB coming out of MIT. It was really interesting, good idea, but never got picked up significantly. And I really like the work that Ryan and his team are doing on Morph. So yeah, and as Jazia mentioned, we're currently developing a trusted learning analytics platform that builds on some of those concepts that we picked up around this area of work.
Great. Well, thanks to the panelists for your introductions. We have a great group with sort of outstanding expertise, both in terms of the research domain, but also the practice and the application domain. So one of the challenges that I think educators face, and this is anyone really from the primary, secondary level through to higher education universities and into corporate learning, but one of the challenges that you're facing is how do you keep up and respond to the expectations of individuals who are used to having pretty seamless experiences online with big tech providers. And then they come into our institutions and sometimes it's not quite a seamless experience. Things are a little bit clunky, and some dude named Bob in the basement developed a legacy platform that's still being used in the institution, and students in that regard are not able to quite do what they want to do in the environment. And I think as consequentially, teachers and others aren't able to do what they'd like to do with the data that's being generated in that kind of environment either. And so a little bit of an argument that we've been talking about or trying to make over the last while is that quite honestly, the idea, if it's digital, it's going to produce data. If you have data, you're going to have analytics or educational data mining, but even that is sort of a purgatory space, if you will, for the ongoing or longer term effects of AI and adoption of automation and other activities in the education sector that really do have a potentially dramatic effect on what schools and universities will look like and how they'll operate in the long run. So a bit of the need then that comes out of this is that some of the technology platforms that exist in many organizations are inadequate as a foundation to deal with real-time effective monitoring and support for students. And we need new approaches that are going to enable sort of a more comprehensive set of analytics tools, as well as AI processes that we can gain insight into what's happening when students are learning and working, and something that's near real time, right? Not something that hits a dashboard the next morning after whatever process has been run. So in this regard, and I'm going to quote from the great Dr. Joksimovic in his position paper, when he said that what we need is a secure, collaborative, agile, and scalable cloud-based infrastructure that establishes the foundation for machine learning and AI models with educational data in order to advance research and build real-time analysis of knowledge processes. So a pretty humble claim in terms of what we need to be able to do. So I'm going to start with you, Srečko, and I'm going to say, you've been involved in the learning analytics field really right since it's, close to its inception anyway, if not right at the start. And so one of the questions that arises, what's missing that has sort of diminished or subdued the growth and the impact of this field?
Well, I guess I will just, that's a great overview. I will just start the discussion a little bit, and then I'm sure that others will have a lot to say there as well. I refer back quite often to Shane's paper from I think it was 2019 or 2020, where we did a study on what kind of data sets we use in learning analytics. And if we look where we came from since 2011 or even before that, it seems like that we're constantly growing data sets and different data sources that we are able to use in order to understand how we learn and to understand teaching and learning, right, and to support learners. But still, most of the research sits in the area of, I have my course and I will analyze data coming out of my course, and I will hopefully inform, my practice. I don't think we are still getting at scale where we really want to be, and I know that some of those challenges informed actually the development of more framework that Ryan, I'm sure we'll talk a bit more about. So that idea of being able to develop research around larger data sets and really to be able to use big data sets in educational research is something that's, I think, currently missing. But there are also other things that that you also, George, touched base. We do have different systems, different sensors that we kind of put in the classroom, right? But they end up all over the place, and that integration of different data sources into one coherent whatever that might be, the storage lake or whatever we call it, it's also something that we are struggling at the moment. Another thing that I really find challenging is when we came to UNSA, right? So everybody would come to us and say, okay, how we analyze my data, how we put this into practice, and that transition from research to practice is something that it's not easy at most of the institutions, because what we have is we take data from our courses, even if we have large scale data, right? So let's say we have access somehow to institutional level data, we do the analysis, but still putting those findings into practice and being able to reach out back to teachers and students is something that it's not readily available, because most of those current available systems developed by different institutions are guarded by institutional policies, institutional IT groups, and so on and so on. So you can't really deploy something and say, okay, even if it's a dashboard, even if it's daily updates, doesn't really matter. It's very challenging to get to the point that you can actually do analysis and deploy something back to teachers and learners. And of course, real time, that's just a dream, I guess, at the moment. I don't know if we need a real-time analytics at this point, but definitely if we are going to develop that general AI, that's something that's currently missing.
Well, so and I'll turn over to you, Ryan. So you've developed some tools, and maybe you can talk a little bit about your work with large data sets, going right back to Pittsburgh Data Shop, and then your more recent projects. But what are the problems that you're trying to solve in the EDM, learning analytics domain, with your current projects?
Well, thank you for asking. And if I may, what I'd like to do is say a couple words, not just about what we're doing, but about what we should be doing and what I feel like the field needs to be doing that maybe we're not. So one of the challenges that the MORPH infrastructure has tried to deal with is the idea that, and MORPH is a collaborative project between Penn and Michigan and Edinburgh a little bit, and a couple other places as well to some extent. It's something where people can take our data, our code base, and use it for their own purposes, however they like. I think there's been some interest in using it at UniSA. I'm not sure if that's gotten going, but the big idea of MORPH is that there's a lot of analyses that you want to do that de-identified data is not good enough for. Like the classical solution is simply to say, oh, well, researcher wants to use data. Well, let's just take out all the things that could be re-identifiable and we'll give it to them. But the problem with that is that there's a lot of good stuff, like say discussion forum postings, that are hard to fully de-identify. And so what MORPH allows you to do is to do analyses on unredacted data, but in a way that protects student privacy in a different fashion by restricting what you can output. So you can't just download the data. You can't view the column with all the student names in it. You have to do the analyses on the servers. And we've used that in several analyses. We're still working on making it a little easier to use. If anybody here in the audience wants to play with the University of Pennsylvania's full MOOC data, unredacted, we can get you an account. So just get in touch with me. I think this is an important step because I think there's a lot of analyses such as discussion forum, but also longitudinal analyses that really depend on having the ability to have identifiers that are stable and connectable. So I think we have to be able to do that kind of analysis. A big challenge that we're not currently addressing kind of in an infrastructural fashion, we've done this kind of in one-off ways in a lot of projects, is once you get your detector, once you build it, how do you integrate it back into the system to run it real time? And I think this is a real challenge. In all of our projects, we end up being a little bit ad hoc. We pull the data out, we work with it, we build the detector, we plug the detector back in. And that creates a lot of friction and creates a lot of delays and a lot of opportunities for things not to actually happen. Another challenge with that is every time you introduce friction and delays, you make people not want to retest their models. And a colleague of mine, Nathan Levin, and I have a recent paper where we look at detector rot, where we look at the degree to which detectors get worse over time, just by the environment changing, by the context changing. And to the extent that we are now able to document detector rot, and it happens more for more contemporary algorithms, the problem is worse for more contemporary algorithms than it is for older algorithms. Makes sense because the more contemporary algorithms squeeze out the last bit of variance, but that also makes them more vulnerable to detector rot than, say, like an old school J48 decision tree. To that extent, it makes a situation where we have to keep updating our models over and over if we want them to remain reliable. And that then makes it a problem if it's any extra effort to do that. So those are some of the challenges we're particularly worried about. We're trying to address the issue of the fact that we sometimes need complete data for analyses. We haven't really done anything to address the problem of the friction in having to reintegrate detectors, and that's a problem because of the issue of detector rot.
Great, thanks, Ryan. So Jazi, I'm going to turn to you next, and some of the questions that both Ryan and Stretchco addressed is we have, on the one hand, as Stretchco noted, a huge quantity of data that we want to hopefully process in near real time in some way. Then we have a secondary challenge, which relates to multiple types of data sources. It's no longer just log files based on an LMS. You could be including, as Stretchco noted, a number of different sources, such as wearables, could be experimental design data that you're trying to include. It could be social media. It could be different types of analysis on language data and so on. So you have this, that the problem that the Stretchco articulated is you have growing needs based on the complexity and the scope and the size of data. Then you have Ryan's point, which is, well, we've got some real research challenges in order for us to be able to ethically, fairly, and as close to anonymously work with student data, but we do have issues of models that have been developed that do get outdated and other challenges that arise in those kinds of settings. So in your case, you're in a setting where you're dealing with large scale data from a range of environments that require you to obviously have a high quality infrastructure in order to be able to provide your learners in an experimental setting or experiential learning setting, more accurately, with the kinds of information that they need. So from your lens, what does an AI infrastructure solve for you as an organization, or what does it help you do better?
Yeah, so as you mentioned, we do collect lots of data and lots of different data, especially because we specialize in experiential learning. So we do have lots of different touch points and different type of data points that we collect. And we've been leveraging the technology. So all our infrastructure sits in the cloud. We currently have everything sitting in AWS, and we leverage all the tools that they have. There are so many different solutions in there that we can leverage to make the whole process of collecting data, treating the data, and then running the models, collecting all the insights, and then delivering the insights. It's all very possible thanks to that. So our advantage is while I'm a data scientist, I look at the science and the applications and the LA and the models. I am supported by a good team of developers and tech people that actually can support me in this. And I think that's it. So this is something I'd like to highlight, is to solve some of the issues we have with AI infrastructure in learning analytics. It's it's a cross-field collaborative effort between researchers and technology providers, but also between developers and tech people that can help us design those very efficient infrastructures. Because I can tell you, I use those infrastructures, but I wouldn't be able to design one myself without the support of the skilled technology people. And this is what we sort of lack, is that we need to leverage the expertise of the right people to help us design and work on these things as well.
Thank you. And we're going to get next set of questions. I'm going to throw something to Hassan first, but next set of questions, we're going to do a deeper dive into like, what does this actually look like? When we talk AI infrastructure, what is it that we actually mean with that? But before we get there, so Hassan, you've developed a platform that you use as, helping solve a practical problem with your students, but also by the same account, needs to rely on pretty rapid feedback to students. So you can't do your processing at the end of the week and then give students something in the form of a dashboard. So from your end, when you're thinking about an AI infrastructure, what is it that you want it to do with Ripple or with other tool sets that you're involved with?
Thanks, George, and others. I'll take a step back if that's okay. And I think talking about the AI in education infrastructure, I think part of our challenge has been communicating the importance of that. And I think what we need to identify what realistic and important problems AI can solve in education. I think this is an area where healthcare has been very, very successful. And the impact of AI in healthcare is that it saves lives that otherwise will be lost. You need to have the ability to monitor the person in real time, because that would allow you to save their life. Now, I don't know if real-time analytics in education is a blessing or a curse. I'm already teaching a class of 1,000, and I'm already challenged to just be in that class. What would analytics of 1,000 people coming back to me live would give me? So I think part of what we might need to think about, and if there is limited grants that's going to go into all these different fields, I think part of what we might need to do better is to say why this is important, why I need to know what's happening in a discussion forum. And a lot of these might have long-term benefits, for society and education. But for us to be able to bring in the grants, we need to have some immediate benefits that we highlight. So that we can get into those part of those grants and develop such infrastructures. So I would first, I guess, would question what is the biggest problem such an infrastructure can solve for us. Going into how that infrastructure can be developed, I'm going to go back to healthcare again. I was listening into a talk last week from a team of healthcares that during the pandemic worked across 79 countries to get data in partnership with IBM so that they can share data in a way that they could run an expert system that, for example, for a male, which is, in their 70s, they've had a heart attack with this level of oxygen, what interventions have been used across the world and what's been most successful. And then a doctor can make a call right on the back. Now, from the perspective that how they've developed this across 79 countries was that none of the countries actually share data with one another. All of the data for each of the countries sits within that country. All the models are learned across in each of those countries, and then sort of the model and the statistics are shared across the platform. Now, I was thinking, that would be so desirable in the education side. Assume that we could have such a system at the institute and university levels, that across the globe will have universities that are running sort of models within their own universities, but sharing the insights across the globe, so that we have learner models that work across the globe without actually having the need to sort of communicate that data and have ethics applications that go between all of these. I don't know if that's really answering the question or just making more questions. But I think first, what's important we can do. Second, how can we do it, across the globe such that we don't necessarily need all this data communication to begin with.
Thanks, Hassan. I think the benefit of having the microphone is you can ask the question there, answer the question that you want to have answered. So, no, I think, but you raise a really good point, is that, yeah, the why do we want it in the first place? But I want to sort of get to the crux of the challenge, which is, okay, we've talked infrastructure, all of you have addressed a different angle of why you feel there are, what challenges exist in some aspect of the education setting, ranging from privacy to potentially real-time feedback to, cross-institutional collaboration, as Ryan has addressed, and so on, and to what you're sharing about the ultimate motives of what you actually want to achieve with any kind of a learning intervention. So now I want to talk about the core idea, which is infrastructure. So I'm going to actually throw it right back to you, Hassan. and ask you, like, when you think of an AI infrastructure, like, what does that look like, and what does that mean to you? Because I'm sensing that it means a lot of different things. And probably, if there's 4 people on the panel, there's probably 5 definitions. But what does an AI infrastructure look like for you that would help you do the kind of work that you want to be able to do?
I'll make this one quick so that we'll hear from others. But in my head, that infrastructure need to simultaneously meet the needs of practitioners and researchers. My go back to is to healthcare. In healthcare, you need to do the research, develop the drug, and actually then develop it and then actually use it. In education, it's possible to do it simultaneously. In fact, most of the big edtechs out there have no research. The unicorns out there that are getting the big bucks. Holland IQ is sort of the inside provider for edtech. Is reporting that there's close to $6 billion being used in AI in education across different technologies across the globe. Very many little research is actually done in most of that. So I think we need to find the infrastructures that meet the needs of both the practitioners and researchers at the same time. And again, I would go back to say, what is the problem we want to solve before we actually come up with the infrastructure?
So in the one, and I'll just clarify a little bit. So one of the challenges is, that would then been a bit of a difficulty in that, all infrastructure questions are tied to problem questions. Do you think there are certain things, though, that exist across scope? Like if we had these and these functionalities in this kind of a setting, that would allow us to solve a range of questions. But if the infrastructure is tied specifically to one set of problems, like if, let's say, if I've interpreted you correctly, let's say one problem we're trying to address is student dropout or student retention. And so if we have an AI infrastructure that addresses student dropout and student retention, but then all of a sudden we face a new problem, which is now, let's say Ryan comes along and he says, oh, guess what? I've created like a fantastic, personal learning graph. I think we should do we then need a new infrastructure for his personal learning graph, or am I not quite understanding sort of the angle that you're
absolutely right with that. And looking at Shreko and the infrastructure paper that he's put together, kind of goes across those different questions with the ability to have something that would answer all those questions. I would still argue that you need to have some overall ideas of does this infrastructure ever need to be real time? Because knowing some of those is an important aspect of how you develop it.
All right, so thanks, Hassan, for the clarification there. And Srečko, maybe if you get a chance, I'm going to first deal with a question with Jazia, but Srečko, if you get a second, maybe if you want to bring up an image from the paper that addresses the particulars of infrastructure, if you want to share the screen on that. While we're doing that, probably the best one to articulate would be the either your second figure or, well, actually no, maybe your first figure, just to get an overview so people understand practically what is that we're talking about. I'm trying to ground this conversation in something that looks like, oh, this is relevant to us. Versus something like high level, non-technical kind of discussion. So Jazia, to you first, and then I'll go to Ryan, and then I'll Srečko, because he's pretty slow with clicking. He may need an extra 5 minutes to get the document up. But Jazia, starting with you, you mentioned that you use the AWS infrastructure. And so when you say you use AWS, what does that mean? So is that where everyone that's developing an AI infrastructure needs to sit within, say, the big three, the Google, the AWS, the Azure environment? Or what does that look like when Practera talks about an AI infrastructure?
How much time do I have to talk about this?
Well, until I mute you.
So I just wanted to, before I get into that, I just wanted to argue something about what Hassan mentioned in terms of like, before we need the infrastructure, we need to actually identify what we need it for. I think we need to keep in mind that the infrastructure, it's like that table that lets us all sit together to work together. So it's really important to set it up, even if we don't have yet a clear picture of what we're going to do. So, and then I'm going to go to the actual example of what that infrastructure looks like for us. And I'm going to use the infrastructure we built for the CRC project, Trusted Analytics. So we needed to work and collaborate with researchers in LA projects and data and security privacy projects. And it was a little bit of a catch-22 because we wanted to work on data privacy, but we were collaborators from completely different fields, with each of us having its own data and IP. But we still needed to work together. So it was very important for us to be able to build the right infrastructure that lets us collaborate together securely and be able to share research, IP, but in a very secure manner. So, I mean, I can go into more details on that, what exactly that infrastructure looked like. And we did, yes, leverage AWS. And just to give like a broad idea, so what we did is that we designed a collaboration environment for every one of our collaborators. So they were like secure environments within AWS where everyone had access to set of tools to be able, dedicated for their own needs and research or implementation that they needed to do. And then we used some serverless applications that could communicate between the different secure environments of the collaborators. And this way, and with very granular access restrictions, we could exactly define what could be shared across those secure environments as well, and using some API access across that. We've actually published a paper on that. So it's a paper led by Ruth Marshall about how to develop those secure collaborative environments. And yeah, if anyone is interested by the exact structure of the back end, I do invite you to check this paper by Ruth Marshall in BJet, basically. So yeah.
Great. I'll thanks, Jazia. I'll dig that paper up and drop it into the chat in just a minute. I'm going to turn to Ryan now. Ryan, you've worked with a number of platforms, and you come out as a researcher, right? So obviously, from Morph to I think it was Quick Red Fox is another recent project that you're working on. Again, things that require at a certain level something that's a little bit more effective than, say, a traditional data infrastructure that you might have in educational settings. And I think one of the key issues there is how do we bring together novel research questions with impactful practices that do guide students and optimize their learning and their performance opportunities. What does that look like for you when you're sitting down? I know you work with startups and you've been involved in the formation of EDM as a field, so you have a lot of deep expertise in this area. For you, if you were to say, you know what, this is what I want my infrastructure to do as I start to move more and more or do more and more in the AI space, any sense in what that would be?
Oh boy, that's a great question. I mean, the fascinating thing about working with industry, and the thing I've really been grateful for, is that a lot of people look at translational research. They think of translational research as academics who have great ideas and they bring them to industry and they change industry. And I actually think that there's so much that goes the other way. I learned from working with my partners in industry about what the real problems are that are affecting kids' lives kind of in learning day to day. And what are some research questions? Like, for example, do detectors rot over time? How much data do you need to use Bayesian knowledge tracing effectively? That's been so effective and so powerful for me. In terms of what you need in an infrastructure, I think the big key is that infrastructure needs to be in a place where it's easy to do what you need to do, where it's easy to get the data out, and where it's easy to put your results back in, right? And I think, again, as I mentioned earlier, I think that getting the data out is so much easier than the putting the results back in. There's also is the data got everything you need, which is surprisingly often a big problem in partnerships with industry, where somebody early on thought it would be clever to, we don't need this piece of information, so we'll just throw it out. And then it turns out that they've been collecting all this data for years, but it's lacking a timestamp. You wouldn't believe how often people are lacking a timestamp, right? And so you just have all this sequence of events and you can't do very much with it. So getting the right data out, getting the right data collected, getting it out, and then being able to link it back in, very powerful. And I want to say, by the way, one comment quickly on Jazia's great thoughts on using cloud-based platforms, which is that cloud-based platforms are amazing for collaboration, and they're amazing for resources that you wouldn't have had otherwise, right? Like, one of my grad students says, "This analysis is taking forever, Professor Baker." and I say, oh, just put 16 GPUs on it. You can always get more. And that is such a powerful, wonderful thing for being able to do research. It's also a powerful, wonderful thing for being able to say, oh my gosh, I can't believe the bill I just got from AWS. So some interesting challenges there that I hadn't thought about. You don't think about when you're kind of doing research on single computers about, oh, if I do the analysis this way, it'll be faster, but it'll cost my lab $7,000. So.
Great. Yeah, I think those are the dynamics we often don't think about, because even though the idea of it's like ubiquitous, like electricity, the reality is it's also ubiquitous depending on what you're doing, ubiquitous like, I don't know, the stock market in terms of what it can cost you. Srečko, I'm not sure if you can share on this. If not, I can share the my screen.
If you just enable me, I could, or you can share, doesn't matter.
All right, maybe I'll share just because it looks like I have to give you host permission. I'm not sure if that'll end the recording for me because of how this particular thing is set up. So I'm going to share, just so you're aware, the first figure in the document, and then I can move around if you want me to share something else. So one of the things that's come up, so Srečko and a group of us have been working on a position paper that we'll send to all the attendees shortly after the event in the next week or so, that captures some of the ideas around what an AI infrastructure should or could maybe do. And you'll see here everything that's reflected in the conversation already, and you can just maybe speak to it quickly. You don't have to go into great detail, Srečko, but the idea is you've got a range of data sources that you need to do something with. You have privacy issues, ethics issues, something that Jazia mentioned as well, multi-stakeholder access. And so, Srečko, why don't you speak a little bit to the diagram on the screen and what this means in terms of what you think an AI infrastructure should look like in an educational setting?
Well, I'll try to build on what everyone said already, and on Lisa's question in the Q&A section, right? So when we think of this infrastructure, I don't know if that's the right term anymore, but I think we should talk about that more as a socio-technical system rather than just a technology that sits somewhere in the background, right? Because as Hasan mentioned, it should enable researchers and practitioners, right? So when we talk about data science, we all know that 80% of the work goes to data processing. So imagine if we had data pre-processed somewhere, sitting somewhere, not just on my laptop, right? So that was one of the challenges we wanted to do here. If we have data hitting the data lake that we deployed, we wanted to take most of the load of data pre-processing and having researchers diving into data the ways they want to and make it easy. But for that to happen, you can't just assume that people will know how to use all those systems. So there has to be, and I refer to that word quite often. So if on the sense making, right, in plain, the adoption of certain systems, and including this infrastructure, depends to how much it can actually help us do our work and how much it interferes with our sense making processes, right? So that's one of the that's just, I guess, one part of the puzzle. And then the second one is how we enable teachers and learners to use what we are able now to put into practice, whether that's a dashboard, whether that's on task, where we can actually design all those very useful rules and follow up with students. It doesn't really matter, but there has to be the platform, the infrastructure, whatever we call it, has to enable both researchers and practitioners to make use of it. And it doesn't really, also we can't expect teachers to be able to upload different data sets, to run all kinds of analysis, but to make that process seamless so they can actually get out of it what they need. Another thing that I really that it is really important, and I often refer to Tore's work here. Tore Hall, I think I saw him in the group as well, where he described what are the aspects that every ed tech solution should consider. And a big deal there is building this and similar solutions with data privacy in mind. I know that Doug tweeted, Doug Lowe, he tweeted, I think 2 months ago, that having data, private data, is a liability, right? And I really I totally agree with Ryan. And I think that what they've been doing with Morph is one step towards, and really important step towards achieving this privacy. And Hassan also mentioned sharing models rather than sharing data. That's amazing. And but there is also another thing. Sharing models does not always guarantee that we can't trace students back. So Jazia can say more on. Yeah, one time. Yes, there is so much more to do. So we can, Jazia explained that really nicely in our workshop the other day. If we share the model, we can query, and Thierry also talked about that, we can query models back and get information that we want. So sharing models, sharing results does not necessarily guarantee student privacy. What we actually need is something closer to synthetic data sets, right? And that's what we are trying to develop as well. So I guess I'll try to summarize this. And developing the single infrastructure needs to include all the stakeholders. It's not just technology, it's about social aspects as well. It's about people who use that and who depend on such technology. It needs to cover all those aspects of security and robust user access, and applying all the ethical and policy standards. And another thing here is, and I'll refer to work back from University of Michigan, all the policy, most of the policies and guidelines that we have at our institutions are static. So they say we need to protect data, but then we use data sets that we collect. We want to use them in a dynamic manner, right? So we want to be able to inform teaching and learning. So how we go from that, okay, we store data, we protect it under the key, into putting it into use. I don't think we covered that very nicely. So that's something that similar architecture should help resolving. So it's as Ryan said, it's a long process, and this is, I guess, just step towards it.
So, so just to flag then, thanks, Srečko. So part of the issue is to say, all right, so there's this entanglement of organizational challenges related to privacy and stakeholders, the needs of teachers and educators, which obviously looks at the applications, the fourth point on the screen here. Then you have sort of the research work that's quite critical. And this is where people like Ryan and Hassan and others play, which is the work with modeling and building these kinds of outputs and results that are going to be useful and practical and deployable. And then, of course, the technical stuff that, I mean, no, other than, I shouldn't say that I said before that this is going to be the most exciting topic ever, but nobody necessarily is overwhelmingly enthused with data for the sake of data. I think it's, what does data do for us? But we do have to address the data, the security, the privacy, the ethics, and increasingly multi-source data that starts to come in as well. So I think the core argument here, Srečko, that is articulated in this position paper is important to sort of consider and at least be aware of on what this might look like over time, and how this is instantiated in an actual environment to create real-time activity. Now, there's been a number of questions that have been addressed in the discussion forums, and I see panelists have targeted those as well. So I'm maybe going to pick a couple of questions here. So one is, Lisa asks, are you including infrastructure, both the digital tools, platform, software, and social infrastructure, such as collaborative organizations and working groups? So there's a question around in the paper that Srečko has articulated. I would say it's primarily technical, right? It's saying, what does this look like in, say, an AWS or an Azure environment? But I'll ask, let's go with Hassan or Ryan. Either of you want to take this. When you think of AI infrastructure, do you also consider the collaborative dynamics and the working groups?
I'll jump in. Yes, we should. Now, do we? Not as well as we could. I don't think our tools for that are amazing. I mean, the text replay tools I built are explicitly designed for the idea that they're going to be done, collaboratively with different people coding the same things. But a lot of our tools, the coordination, the socio-technical systems and infrastructures are often kind of ad hoc and left unofficial. Like for Brown, people coordinate their field observations with hand signals and with eye gesture, like making eye contact and things like that. And the coordination of the broader community of practice has always been very ad hoc. So yeah, I think that we have a lot to learn from the computer supported collaborative work community and practice. on how to actually make infrastructure that isn't just technical, but really loops in the full socio-technical aspects.
I would like to mention one of the tools we leverage. It's called Cloud9. It's a tool in AWS, and it's a coding tool. And the advantage of it is that it supports multiple coding languages, but it lets you invite people that are from a different AWS environment to come in and code with you. And it's like a four-hands coding sessions. So you see them connecting, you see their name, you can see the small icon that shows you where they're typing, and you can type at the same time. It's real time, and you can code together, debug, and then once you're done, you can kick them out and say like, hey, I don't want you to be here anymore. And you remove the access, and it's very seamless. Like it's just like, let the person in, help you code, debug, revoke the access. And those kind of tools are really good for this type of collaborative work, but at the same time, very secure.
Great. Well, thanks all. I know there's some questions going on that I'm a little behind on in the discussion area, so I'll try and sort of dive into those in a minute. I'd like to turn briefly to, so we've sort of addressed what's needed in the EDM space, learning analytics space. We talked about what an AI infrastructure might actually look like. There's also some discussion of stakeholders, the people that are involved from IT and otherwise. So I'm going to group what was going to be round 3 and 4 questioning into one, which is in most universities, there's a bit of a gap between what a researcher needs and what a practitioner needs. Because a practitioner often, at least let's say, in most universities that I'm acquainted with, could be a faculty member, it could be a chair or a dean, or it could be a provost or a vice provost, or the president or the vice chancellor, or pro vice chancellor, or DVC, or whatever term you want. They're dealing with a slightly different set of concerns than a research concern. So there's privacy, ethics, and other things that are at play. This, I think, is a big challenge, though, because it ends up being a power dynamics issue. So as a researcher, you want to do some interesting work with large scale models, or you want to collect and generate huge amounts of data, but you don't know if you're going to get access to the data from the institution. There might be restrictions on whether you can use it, or whether you even have access to it in the first place. And then the institution may not make sort of an AI infrastructure available for its researchers, such that allows for near real-time interaction with data and data outputs. And so I think those are some of the key challenges that start to arise, is how do we integrate with existing functions in an institution in order to produce that kind of an impact, and what that actually looks like. So, for example, I'll give you a couple of illustrations, and Jared Stein just asked, I think, a good question of a few examples, and I'll just draw a little bit on the paper that we've been talking about, with StretchGoal, but a couple of illustrations of AI in education that require an infrastructure would be things like, knowledge graphs, or creating learner models that are generated close to real time. And we have a colleague, Vidomir Kavanovic, that is leading a project on learner modeling and learner profile development. Personalization, I'm sure Jared and others at Instructure have heard of personalization ad nauseum, like many of us have, but it's the idea of real-time feedback, computed curriculum, and adaptive pathways. There's also the idea of real-time intervention that helps to support sense-making and learning. And we have a colleague, Abelardo Pardo, that's done work around on-task learning. If anyone's interested in having a look at it, ontasklearning.org. It's open source system that does adaptive feedback and provides those kinds of resources to individuals as well, which relates to sort of the assessment and the evaluation as well. But saying that, so there's a number of illustrations that then require an integration of not just research or just practice. These two come together. When you're trying to do real-time assessment of student learning and sense-making, you want to see that through a research lens, but you also practically want to see it through an organizational impact lens. Are we helping our students be successful? So I'm wondering, let's start with you, Ryan, to talk a little bit about how do you navigate those varying interests and inputs that exist between a researcher with certain needs from an AI infrastructure and a practitioner who has security, privacy, and other needs that are around institutional security to attend to. How do you navigate that in your work?
I mean, we've got to meet people where they are, right? I mean, a big part of Morph, was the fact that Chris Brooks and I kind of realized that that the universities we're at, weren't going to just release the de-identified data to researchers, and that's a good thing. And that even if you could de-identify it fully, they had other concerns about their data just being released. But at the same time, that like a whole community of researchers was springing up around the data they had. And there's a real lamppost phenomenon there, where I can't find my keys, and I'm looking under the lamppost, not because my keys are there, but because that's where the light is. So, I mean, I think that we have to meet people where we are, but we have to find solutions creatively to accommodate that. And I think that infrastructures that protect data so it doesn't get downloaded, so people can't see things directly, it's real annoying for researchers to work with. But I think it's one of the ways to make it possible to address those concerns. I also think that we have some educating to do, not just of our partners in industry, but of the people making regulations that affect them. Because increasingly in the United States, we've had pushes towards data privacy policies in districts pushed by non-governmental organizations that restrict any use of data for a wide range of purposes, and that require vendors, for example, to throw out all their data every year, which, if you throw out your data every year, how do you do longitudinal analyses? How do you figure out if things really work? If you make it impossible for people to collect demographic data in the interest of student privacy, then how do you make sure your stuff doesn't have algorithmic bias? So I actually think that there's a lot to be done, not just in the partnership between researchers and practitioners, but in the conversation those practitioners have with regulators. And I think we can play a role in that as researchers in communicating, no, don't just throw out all the data.
Great, thanks. And I think one of the fascinating stories, and I know you're well aware of this, Ryan, is, and it's a reading in the Master of Science and Learning Analytics this week with students at the University of Texas, is around the InBloom case study, which was its own set of results on when big ideas exceed social willingness and legal infrastructure to support what's actually a really good idea at a surface level. Okay, so we got a couple minutes left here, so I'm just going to do a quick sort of wrap up on this, and I'll ask Srečko, Jazia, Hassan in that order to just briefly comment on that question of working with researchers and practitioners, the varying infrastructure needs with those two different client bases. Why don't we start with you, Srečko? Because I know you have experience.
No, I don't. No, I think of course I agree with Ryan on this one. I think what we did is adopting kind of use case or scenarios based approach, where we are trying to tackle different broad set of use cases, where we try to understand what certain group of researchers or practitioners might need, and then we try to support them through infrastructures like this. So it is, of course, as I said, we need to meet people, help people in delivering what their daily work and helping them where they need our help. So if we just deploy infrastructure and put it out there, nobody will use it, right? So I was actually no, I'll throw it to Hassan. I had something else to add, but it just slipped my mind at the moment.
All right. Yeah, Jazia.
Yeah, so I was thinking more about trust in a way. So it's like sometimes it doesn't matter how much of how good is your infrastructure, how everything you've done right, but if the people you're trying to work with don't trust in the process, it's not going to work. And that can be quite challenging, is to how to actually prove to people no, we don't have a back door we're not trying to leak your data, we're not trying, so there is that. It's it doesn't matter how much you build things properly, trust is a big issue. So building that willingness to trust and work together is very important.
So sorry if I may just jump in at the moment. That's actually the point what I was trying to make about trust, right? So most of the time we hear things like InBloom, right? So it failed. And whenever something bad happens, we hear about it, but we don't have enough good examples and good stories to share. And that's where Ryan also mentioned that educating everyone in the process. Yeah, I'm going to stop.
Okay, Hassan, over to you.
Yeah, I'll make it quick as we're running out of time. What we've done at University of Queensland is try to make the two, sort of the research and the practitioner needs, meet them at the same time. So the platform that we've got, which collects data from various tools that are supported across UQ. And those are all brought together. We use AWS as well. Yes, we need to pick up the bills for crunching all that data, making the aggregations, making recommendations for instructors to look at specific students that we think are in need of help. But I think an important part of what we've tried to do is not only support research for the educational researchers, but just give the instructors more of an evidence-based lens to do their actual teaching on day-to-day basis, which is probably just as important for universities and where education is going. We have similarly stopped people from downloading the data, as Ryan mentioned, and it's a pain for researchers, but anyone with sort of the ethics approval will come back and we'll also provide them with the ability to download research and the data as needed.
Great. Well, thanks everyone. I just want to give a particular shout out, to C3L from UniSA. Srečko, the position paper he's been working on sort of drove the initiation for this conversation. So, and then of course having fantastic colleagues and partnerships, with international luminaries of great stature, such as Ryan Baker and Hassan and Jazia. It's great to have you involved. I know the work that you've been doing with C3L, and the paper that you mentioned with BJET is important area of conversation. So the important aspect, I think, for me as a takeaway as we wrap things up, is that the AI infrastructure question is really, it's boringly urgent is probably the best way to describe it. And what I mean by that is it's a conversation that needs to happen in order to really move forward to the next stage of driving impact in educational settings, the next stage of doing work with data at any kind of scale. And to give researchers and practitioners, on the one hand, the insight to be able to understand learning processes, which is what people like Srečko and Ryan and Hassan are concerned about in the EDM learning analytics space. But on the other hand, you want to be able to take those research insights and implement them and drive near real-time impact while a student's learning. As I mentioned right at the start, part of our challenge is that we're competing with technology companies that have massive resources, while we in some cases have a user experience that isn't quite as well designed or as optimal. So our attempt at personalization isn't going to be compared with what's happening at a university down the road. It's going to be compared with what happens when I use Facebook or what happens when I use Twitter or Google. Those are our comparison points. And so I just want to say thanks everybody for joining the session. So Jazia, greatly appreciated the organizational insight. Hassan, appreciated your background and expertise in developing these kinds of tools from a learning lens. Ryan, obviously your extensive background in these large scale data infrastructure, and Srečko for germinating the idea that we're discussing today. Thanks everyone for joining us. You'll see a follow-up email soon with the recording, as well as the position paper that we've referenced in several occasions. And if you want to be involved in future Grail webinars, we have a number coming up over the balance of the year. Please let me know as well. Enjoy the rest of the day, everyone.